world changes soon. Can get a doobie on a plane, but there's Uzis in our schools. Every dude who touched a boob or a booty getting me too. What you expect from the kids who went to Hooters after school? We're all triggered and defensive. We're all racist and we're sexist. We all grew up watching South Park. How are we offended? Now being fat is beautiful. Name a thing that you can't do. Jumping jacks, run a mile, live past 42. Man, it used to be cool to just flip a bird to the system, and now it's trendy to be triggered and pretend you're a victim. It's my race, it's my weight, it's because I'm a Christian. I hate the internet and anyone who has an opinion. And everybody angry if you say white. Okay, fine. Pass me the brush and I'll paint my face to the shades right. Let's talk about abortion. Sorry, tell me how this works. Bacteria is life on Mars, but a heartbeat isn't life.
Welcome to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. I am your host, Albert Apache, and as usual, brought to you by Open Source Self-Defense, Fitness, and Grappling. Okay, guys, check it out. So we're going to have an extra long segment at first, and we'll probably be doing a morsel midweek. Talking about today the greatness of Khabib versus Jon Jones, pound for pound, GOAT status. I think Jon Jones has a legitimate argument as to why Khabib should not be handed the pound for pound status nor the GOAT status. Talk a little bit about NFL football, particularly the Pats, the Bucs, Brady-Belichick, and of course my Dallas Cowboys. And then we're going to wrap it up with a little short talk on the issue of transgender athletes and what that could mean and what we have to do, or the vigilant nature we're going to have to take as Jiu-Jitsu practitioners to ensure that, you know, our daughters, our sisters, our mothers, our wives are not competing in an unfair match. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, guys, so let's go ahead and get into this first segment of the show. So unless you are not an MMA fan, and if you are an MMA fan, I guess if you were under a rock this weekend, you heard that, or you watched as Khabib won his 29th fight and retained the UFC light heavyweight belt. After the fight, Khabib had some shocking news to most of us. I think the MMA fan community, fan base, as well as the MMA fighter community just assumed, had taken it for granted that he was going to make the run to go 30-0, and so had he won or had he lost in this last fight, I don't think anybody thought that Justin Gaethje would be his final fight. So I think it took everybody by surprise. That being said, after Khabib Nurmagomedov, let me try and say this, because I generally don't say his last name because I have a hard time with it. But let's see if I can get this. Nurmagomedov. There we go. After the fight, you know, he asked for a couple of things, right? One of those things was he wanted to be the pound for pound best fighter. He wanted this from the UFC. But here's the deal. As I understand it, it's the press that gives the rankings for the pound for pound. I don't think it's the actual UFC brass that gives the pound for pound. But either way, that being said, Jon Jones had some things to say after Khabib announced that. And some people got on Jon Jones about this. And even here, like, you see how they're trying to frame it. People slam Jon Jones for seemingly taking shots at Khabib, right? Yeah, they're slamming Jon Jones. But Jon Jones didn't take any shots at Khabib. You know, Jon Jones goes on to talk about, you know, in this particular article, he talks about, you know, that he's the pound for pound best, or he, you know, as of when Khabib asked for it, Jon Jones was pound for pound number one. And he was basically saying, look, I didn't lose a fight. I've been champion for a really long time. I've had you know, what, maybe 3 or 4 times the amount of title defenses that Khabib has. Um, if we're being intellectually honest, although John's record has a loss on it technically, if we're being intellectually honest, MMA fans, we all know that John didn't actually lose that fight, right? Um, so John is basically saying, hey, I should be able to um, defend the idea that I'm pound for pound because that affects my legacy. And, I'm just saying, like, I respect him. I think he's done great, but I still think I'm a better fighter pound for pound. And we're going to talk about why John Jones has a point and Khabib is not the GOAT. Now, before I get into this, I really want people to understand I am not a huge John Jones fan. Actually, if you listen to some of the things that I've said or even tweets that I've had, um, all kinds of other things, I'm not the biggest fan of John Jones. I just am not. I do feel like, you know, John tends to run his mouth a bit much. I do believe that John Jones is not the perfect fighter that everybody else thinks that he is. I feel like he really was pushed to the brink against, you know, Dominic Reyes, and I think that I personally had him losing that fight on my scorecards. Okay, but we can't live in the world of, well, my opinion or my what if. Okay, we live in the world of what actually is recorded in the record books, and what's recorded in the record books is the fact that he beat Dominic Reyes. That's what's there. Now let's get into why John Jones has a point and Khabib is not the GOAT. So let's start off with Khabib's very first fight in the UFC. Okay, when Khabib got to the UFC, his very first fight was against Kamal Shalarus. At the time that Khabib fought him, he was 7-1-1. Okay, and not ranked in the UFC. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to speak ill of any of the fighters we're about to talk about, okay? But we have to keep in mind the level of competition because this is what John Jones actually talked about. He talked about the level of competition relative to the number of fights he has is not on the same ratio as John Jones. John Jones is simply saying, look, I've been fighting guys who are top 10, top 5, almost the entirety of my UFC career. This is not the case for Khabib. And as we're going to see, this is absolutely true. Next was Gleison Tibau. When he faced Gleison Tibau, Gleison was 27-7 overall and 16-5 in the UFC. Now, if you go back and you watch this fight, you're going to see that Gleison Tibau gave Khabib all he could handle. In some people's opinion, not mine, okay, but at the time and early on, there were people who thought that Gleison Tibau won that fight. It went to decision, okay? There's people who thought that Gleison won that fight. So, again, we have to look at the level of competition. Now, let's go ahead and move on. Thiago Tavares was his next fight. He was 17-4-1 overall and 12-4-1 in the UFC. 12-4-1 in the UFC. So at this point, most UFC fans, and that's how I'm going to put it because they weren't true MMA fans, still had not heard of Khabib. He was still fighting on undercards, and a lot of the casual fan, the UFC fan, had no idea who Khabib was. That's just the facts, okay? I'm not trying to be diminishing of these guys. I'm not trying to be diminishing of Khabib. I'm just being honest. Next, he fought Abel Trujillo, who was 10-4 overall and had only had one fight, one win in the UFC. Now, when you contrast this, so far, we've seen 4 fighters in the UFC. When you contrast the first 4 fights in Jon Jones' career to the first 4 fights in Khabib's career, the level of competition is exponentially better, or exponentially improves in comparison. Jon Jones's level of competition absolutely is much, much higher. Next, we have Pat Healy, 29-16 overall, and 0-1 in the UFC. So, this is what I'm saying, people. The UFC definitely picks and chooses its fighters that it allows to develop and its fighters that it doesn't. Okay. I have no doubt that many fighters that came into the UFC could have very much more spectacular careers were they walked through the ranks the way that Khabib was. Now, this is not taking anything away from Khabib, okay? But as I stated going into the fight with Justin, okay, in my prediction video, which I did get wrong. I'm not saying I didn't get wrong. I got wrong the pick, but I didn't get wrong things that I said in the breakdown, okay, and the technical side. Khabib is a much different fighter when he's confident, when he's moving forward, when he's calm and collected. He's a much different fighter. He's a much, much better fighter. If he feels at all any kind of rattling or any kind of pressure or anything that disrupts him, he doesn't move as confidently, he doesn't look the same. So, giving Khabib fighters that aren't spectacular early on in his career was absolutely the right move. His management, his coaching team, the UFC, they definitely brought him up absolutely the right way. I actually attribute some of the crash and burn on the public side of life of Jon Jones to the way the UFC skyrocketed him into the limelight. Not saying it's not his fault, not saying that he doesn't bear responsibility. I'm just saying that it's hard to deal with when you're young and to deal with responsibly. That's all. Now, next fight after that was against Dos Anjos. Rafael Dos Anjos. This is the fight that probably finally woke up most casual fans, most UFC fans, to the arrival of Khabib. At the time that Khabib fought him, he was 20-6 overall and 13-4 in the UFC. He was, I want to say he was in the top 10 when Khabib fought him. So, Khabib finally breaks into the top 10. What was that? 6 fighters in, and now he's barely starting to taste the top 10 at 155. Okay. But then he gets another fight with Daryl Horcher, who was 12-1 overall and 0-0 in the UFC. So while he shot up into the top 10 and the bigger names, immediately he gets another fight against a guy who hadn't even fought in the UFC. Now, I'm sure there's a backstory to this. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I remember this fight. Okay, I remember the Dos Anjos fight. I remember the Abel Shahil fight. I do not remember him fighting Daryl Horcher. I don't remember watching this fight. Okay, but you know, most likely it had something to do, some kind of backstory with somebody missing weight or somebody being, you know, a replacement, right? Probably Horcher being a replacement at the last minute. And then after Horcher is when he really has the bigger notoriety, right? He goes on, the next 6 fights were then against top 10 competition. Michael Johnson, Edson Barbosa. Then finally for the title, for the vacant title, against El Iaquinta. Then Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje as of Saturday afternoon. So he's had 4 title fights and 3 title defenses. When you contrast that to what John Jones has done, when you contrast that to what GSP has done, when you contrast that to the number of title defenses that Anderson Silva had, I'm sorry, but the reality is that Khabib, it's hard to make the argument that he is the GOAT based on the level of competition that he's fought. Yes, you can point to his record, 29-0, 29-0, and I'm not saying that it's not hard to go 29-0, and it doesn't matter who you're necessarily fighting, there's always that puncher's chance, but you have to compare apples to apples if you're going to start saying, oh, they're the greatest of all time. Oh, well, you know, pound for pound, the greatest in the world. If that's going to be your argument, then we have to look at, well, what did they do against the top competition in their era, in their organization? And in their era, in their organization, right, the reality is that John Jones' resume is much more impressive than Khabib's. GSP's resume is much more impressive. The level of competition that GSP faced was much, much higher. The level of competition that Anderson Silva faced was much higher. And this is not to diminish Khabib. I'm not diminishing Khabib. I'm not saying that he couldn't go on and defend his title 6, 7, 8 times. I'm not saying that he couldn't. But he didn't give us that picture. So we can't speculate on what could have been, what could he have done, and then say, okay, based on what he maybe could have done, we're going to go ahead and give him GOAT status. Right? And my problem isn't so much with Khabib, right? I understand Khabib. What I have a problem with is the recency bias that seems to permeate and run rampant within the MMA community. It's always, what have you done for me lately? Let me give you a couple of references of how fickle MMA fans are, how the recency bias is out of control. It was not that long ago, okay, that DC was fighting Stipe Miocic. And when he rematched with Stipe, the big talk was, if he beats Stipe, he's going to be the GOAT. He's going to be the GOAT because he'll have done this and he'll have done that, and everything that DC had done, he would have been the GOAT. Right? Look at everything DC did at heavyweight, then look at everything that DC did at light heavyweight, and then going back to heavyweight. And if he beat Stipe, who is the greatest heavyweight champ, then that would make Daniel Cormier, put him in the conversation of GOAT. But John Jones destroyed that dude twice. But John Jones isn't the GOAT. I mean, now, I know you're going to hear all the arguments, oh, PEDs, 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 PEDs. Look, man, I'm right there with you. Like, I understand the argument with the PEDs. I think that it's horrible. I think that, it's BS. But the reality is the UFC decided that they were going to give him the wins that they gave him. DC doesn't have any interest in fighting John Jones again, and I think that's because he knows that John Jones would beat him. Even worse than the first time he beat him. Even worse than the second time he beat him. There's a reason why DC does not want to fight John Jones. We all know that would have been the biggest money fight he had, and DC downplayed it and downplayed it and downplayed it and went after Stipe over and over and over again, even though the bigger money fight would have been to do a trilogy, rematch, whatever you want to call it, with John Jones. But he didn't want it. I've criticized DC in the past, and I believe this is true. DC is way too self-aware of his own legacy. And it seems a bit coincidental, and I think it is a big part of the issue with John Jones speaking up, that Khabib happens to be a teammate of Daniel Cormier. Do I think that there is a level of jealousy, whether it be explicit or implicit, from DC for him to support the idea that Khabib should be pound for pound over John Jones, that he should be the GOAT over John Jones? Absolutely, I believe that DC has somewhere, whether it be, something he acknowledges that he's conscious of or subconscious, some kind of interest in seeing John Jones knocked off of the pound for pound list. And even if we're not talking John Jones being pound for pound, but we're talking about the GOAT status, again, like I said, you have Anderson Silva, you have GSP, who have much, much more impressive resumes than Khabib when it comes to the level of competition and the number of title defenses that they had, the number of title fights that they were in. The other problem I have with Khabib is, as you go through his entire career, one of the things you'll notice is he's never given a rematch. No matter how close the fight was, he's never given anybody a rematch. Now, some people think that that's okay, that that's not a problem. And while that might be okay on the lower level regional circuits, because, hey man, dude, I don't have time to fight you again while I'm climbing the ladder to get into the biggest organization in the world, I understand that. Once you are in the bigger organization in the world, once you're in the biggest organization in the world, and Michael Johnson doesn't get a rematch, Edson Barbosa doesn't get a rematch, El Iaquinta doesn't get a rematch, Conor doesn't get a rematch. Dustin doesn't get a rematch. Nobody gets a rematch. No matter how close or how well they did in the fight against him, no matter whether it was Gleason Tebow didn't get a rematch, you really have to wonder why no rematches. For instance, Gleason Tebow and Eli Quinta, I think, both have a really good argument for a rematch. I think Conor, because of the long layoff, because of the fact that he did win a round, has a good argument for a rematch. Why would Khabib not want to give any of those men a rematch? It's a little bit perplexing. Now, I get it. He can do what he wants. I'm not saying that he owes us, the fans, or he owes any fighters a rematch. But when you're asking to be put in pound for pound and you're asking to be the GOAT, then you're asking to have your career and your record examined and analyzed. Let's, again, since John Jones is the pound for pound right now, let's look at John Jones and his record as far as rematches. When he rematched Gustafsson, he absolutely destroyed Gustafsson. When he rematched DC, a possible greatest of all time, he knocked him out. Now, I know that's a no contest now, but when we were watching it, we all saw him knock DC out. So, MMA fans, just so fickle. I mean, let's be real. There are already UFC and MMA fans, and I guarantee you, if this happens, Robert Whittaker just beat Jared Cannonier. This solidifies his number one ranking. Should he fight Israel Adesanya again and Adesanya were to beat Whittaker? Because there's already little cheap birds tweeting it out. People will forget all about Khabib, and Adesanya will all of a sudden be the GOAT. The best pound for pound fighter. This is how fickle UFC fans are. This is how fickle the UFC media, those that give the rankings, are. It's all about who is the hot commodity at the moment. Recency bias is so rampant in the MMA community. It's always, what have you done for me lately? And John Jones raises a serious critique of those who want to Sunday morning octagon corner when fighters, basketball stars, football stars, quarterbacks, greatest NBA players, they can win games by field goals. They can win games by the skin of their teeth, 2 points, last second shot, 1 point, and they're still the GOAT. They're still great. They're still amazing. Let a fighter eke by on a decision victory, and all of a sudden their greatness is questioned. It really is, with fight fans, it really, really is one of those things where we don't tend to appreciate the fighters that we have in the moment or in the recent past until the fighter steps away and we no longer have that fighter available. Now, here's the thing. I don't know that Khabib is going to be missed the way that GSP was missed. I don't think that he's going to be missed in the way that John Jones will be missed. I don't think he's going to be missed the way that Anderson Silva's heydays are missed. I just don't believe it. And one of the reasons why is because he only gave us 4 title fights. He only gave us about 8 fights against top 10 UFC talent. He hadn't even reached the pinnacle of pay-per-view selling power. So those things do matter. They matter. We never got to see him defend the title against somebody he had fought before. Somebody who, looked devastating. Let's face it, the matchup, because of stylistically that we all thought is the toughest matchup for him, which is Tony El Kukui. He will now never face him. He will never face Tony Ferguson. Stylistically, Tony Ferguson is a person who was probably his toughest matchup stylistically. And as I said in the breakdown, the reason why I think certain guys, when you initially look at them, look like they're going to be stylistically a bad matchup for Khabib is because of the way that they strike. Well-rounded fighters that strike in volume, that do not waste a lot of energy after the takedown is achieved, trying to get back to their feet, and they're okay fighting from their back, are going to give Khabib a hard time. Justin, I'm sorry, but he changed his style. He changed his style. He went from, you watch his last couple of fights, his last few fights after the Dustin Poirier loss, he switched into a volume striker. He hits hard, but he's looking to pepper you with a volume of shots, not trying to knock you out with every shot. And he changed that style 180 degrees. He went from, I'm going to strike, with volume to, he kept throwing everything he could into just about every punch he threw at Khabib. Big, huge looping punches, which made it easy for Khabib to slip on. When he calmed down, in the moments he calmed down, and he threw straight punches, and he didn't throw with every ounce of power behind every punch, he was connecting with Khabib and hit him with some pretty solid shots. Now, some of that is Khabib's doing. I mean, we have to be honest. Some of that's Khabib's doing. The pressure that he puts on him, he puts on so much pressure on a fighter that they feel like all they have left to do is to throw with reckless abandon. But that being said, it still changed the fighting style, right? There's a certain psychology, a certain understanding people would have to have going up against Khabib. But we'll never see Khabib fight the person that we thought was his toughest matchup as UFC fans, as MMA fans. We'll never get to see him rematch against El Iaquinta, Conor McGregor, Gleison Tebow. These are guys who actually, you could argue, did very well against Khabib and probably deserved a rematch. Because the reality is that styles are what make fights. But that's what I got, guys. Hopefully, if you disagree, you'll comment down below or make your own video, whatever the case may be. But it's time. Let's go ahead and move on to our next subject. Okay, guys, on to the next subject of the day. And we're going to talk a little bit about Bill Belichick and the Patriots and Tom Brady and the Bucs. This is a little bit of an older article, but, came out in May 11th, 2020. And essentially, in this article, this guy goes on to talk about how he believes that, well, Tom Brady is the GOAT. He really was declining, and that Belichick was going to do better than Tom Brady, and we were going to see that Belichick was the genius of the dynasties, the driving force. Right now, with the Bucs and Patriots records, I think we're seeing that that's the opposite. I think what we're seeing is that Tom Brady is, in fact, the grease of the machine that was the Patriots. Now, let's look at the NFC, and particularly the NFC South. The NFC South has some pretty, let's just say, some pretty good teams, right? Teams that should be in it down the stretch, to include the Bucs. The Patriots division, the AFC, particularly, what is that, the AFC East, they are not particularly a strong division. And the fact that the Patriots are struggling there, I think, says volumes. And let's face it, I mean, Cam Newton is not, chopped liver. Are we saying that Cam Newton has diminished that much? So right now, the Patriots are trying to modify their offense to Cam, and Tom Brady is trying to adapt to the offense in Tampa Bay. Right now, it looks like the coaching staff in New England is having a hard time putting together an offense which Cam can flourish in. And Tom seems to be picking up this Bruce Arians down the field, stretch the defense, go at them offense. It seems like he is totally starting to feel how to work within this offense. Now, I get it. We are only, about a third of the way through the season, right? But it's a pretty good barometer for how the rest of the season is going to go. If both teams were to continue on the way they are, we're looking at somewhere, we're looking for the Bucs to finish with somewhere between 10 and 12 wins. The Patriots 6 to 8 wins. They may make 8 and 8 if we're being generous. Before the whole split happened, I had told a lot of people, and it had always been my opinion, that you had to keep in mind that Belichick was an under 500 coach before the emergence of Tom Brady. He had been a head coach in Cleveland. He had been the head coach for, I want to say about a season and a half for the Patriots. And it was looking like his little backhanded slap in the face to Bill Parcells was a heck of a karma, and he was not going to be lasting much longer in New England. And then the emergence of Tom Brady. So I think it'll take another season or two. But if this season ends the way we see it going for the Patriots now, and then it ends in a similar fashion next year, I think the writing is on the wall that Bill Belichick will be on his way out. I think it would expedite that if Tom Brady were to go deep into the playoffs this year. If Tom Brady makes it to the NFC Championship game, or Lord forbid, the Super Bowl, I think that Belichick might not even get that second year. Because if you're Mr. Kraft, you have to be looking at this and going, what in the hell do I do? I thought I had the greatest coach in the NFL. Turns out I have a so-so coach, and I let the greatest quarterback of all time walk out of here with one more Super Bowl still in his future. But we shall see. I want to move on to the next topic, which is a little bit more red pill, a little bit more something we need to talk about. And let's go ahead and let's move right along. So if you're an NFL fan, the next big story probably in the NFL, because it does involve the Dallas Cowboys, is the fact that Andy Dalton went down. So the Cowboys have lost Dak Prescott, and they have lost Andy Dalton in what is ended up essentially being nearly back-to-back weeks. I mean, not quite, but pretty close to it. Andy Dalton had a concussion, so he'll probably be out for maybe 2 weeks, maybe at least a week, right? And people are already starting to talk about what are the Cowboys' options after Andy Dalton. Talking about trading this, that, and the other. The one that has me, the one that I want to talk about, here's the red pill moment, guys, is the signing of Colin Kaepernick. I mean, I really don't understand why people think the Dallas Cowboys would sign Colin Kaepernick. It makes absolutely no sense. He's not going to come in and start winning you football games. He's been out of the game for 4 years. He doesn't know the offense. Who knows if he is really in game shape or not? And could you imagine, let's just say for the sake of argument, that he were to come in and let's say Dalton was out for 3 weeks, so he was more than just a backup. Well, first let's imagine what would happen in all reality. In all reality, you say, okay, fine, we'll sign him as the backup to our third string quarterback because he doesn't know the offense, so he's not going to start. There's going to be a firestorm. Firestorm from all the SJWs who aren't even football fans, running around crybabying about why is Colin Kaepernick not starting? Why did you sign him if you're not going to play him? Why, it's because he's black. Oh, blah, 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 blah. This, that, and the other. You don't want a black quarterback in Dallas, which is the most ridiculous thing considering Dak Prescott was just our quarterback a couple of weeks ago. But they'll still say it because it's not about facts. It's about a narrative, and it's about getting attention, and it's about whining and crying and being victims. So that would be the number one headache you'd have to deal with. Okay. The number two headache you'd have to deal with is that when Andy Dalton did come back, okay, let's say in 2 weeks, Andy Dalton did come back, because they're not going to keep the third string, the backup quarterback, Andy Dalton, the third string quarterback, I forget his name now, and then Colin Kaepernick. You're not going to keep three quarterbacks on the roster when you're the Dallas Cowboys and you're nearly halfway through the season, and you're going to have to pay Colin more money. You're going to most likely cut him and release him, and then another firestorm after that. And then let's say that all things worked out in Colin's favor. Let's say Colin Kaepernick gets signed. Let's say Andy Dalton is out 3 or 4 weeks, gives Colin time to learn the offense. Let's say that he is in really good shape, so he's nearly game ready. He comes in and he pulls a couple games out for the Dallas Cowboys, and now they are, not in a winning record, but because the NFC East is so bad, they're in the hunt. Let's say he plays it out and maybe he gets them into the playoffs. Maybe they play one playoff game. Do you know what you're asking for when it comes time to start negotiating with Dak, and whether or not you're going to re-sign Dak or if you're going to keep Colin Kaepernick? Do you know the mess that you're taking? See, this is where you can tell that there's a political agenda, a social agenda, where they're trying to use the NFL as their little social petri dish. Because nobody would have a problem, or nobody in the sports media would have a problem or think that it was a shot at Dak Prescott, or somehow be trying to leverage power against Dak Prescott should the Cowboys sign Colin Kaepernick. However, that's exactly what they said when the Cowboys signed Andy Dalton. Oh, they're just trying to get leverage against Dak, and they're trying to cheat Dak even more. But should they sign Colin Kaepernick and he were to win games and it came time at the end of the year, nobody realizes what kind of leverage that is against Dak and the soap opera that you're asking for? For what? Maybe a playoff game? For maybe a playoff game. I don't think there's anybody that's under any delusion that Colin Kaepernick is going to come into the Dallas Cowboy organization and lead them to a Super Bowl this season. So why would you want the drama of any outcome? Of any outcome. If Colin sucks and you cut him, the SJWs are still going to run around and say that you cut him because he's Colin Kaepernick and he doesn't want to stand for the anthem. And it has everything to do with his social views and nothing to do with the fact that he sucked on the field. If he plays well, you're asking for a huge drama when it comes to re-signing or not re-signing Dak Prescott. If you sign him and he stays a backup and he never sees the field, you're asking for SJWs to meltdown over that as well, because, well, how come we can't all be fair and we all share the same amount of time on the field? How come Andy Dalton can't every once in a while come out and let Colin play? I don't understand how come everybody doesn't get to touch the ball, because most of these people who are whining and crying, okay, the biggest, loudest voices of the SJW movement, and this is what athletes really need to understand. They're not athletes. They're not athletics fans. They're not sports fans. There's those kids. Most of the people making the most amount of noise are those kids that when you were in high school, they used to call you the dumb jock. They were the social, the kids that weren't into the whole social scene, that weren't the popular kids, that have a chip on their shoulder, and of course they want to blame you, the jock, for being the popular kid. Even though maybe, and not that there weren't jerks, right? We all know that there were some jocks that were jerks, some football players, basketball players that were jerks, but not everyone was. Just like every hippie guy, just like every stoner wasn't cool, man. Some of them were a-holes too, right? But they're not fans. They've never been sports fans. So I hope the Dallas Cowboys just see it through, sign somebody that they can sign, probably re-sign Cooper Rush. That would probably be the best option at this point. Even though the offense has changed, he's familiar with the organization. There's no expectation that he's going to come in and take the starting job away from Dak. There's no expectation that he believes he's going to be on the roster for, years to come. He'll understand his role. I don't think you trade for any of the other quarterbacks that would be possible to trade for at this point. No, none of them will be worth what you'd give up in future seasons. So, but this idea of signing Colin Kaepernick, I knew as soon as I saw Andy Dalton go down, I knew that this would be what these just ridiculous writers would suggest. Oh, it's time for the Cowboys to sign Colin Kaepernick. Just ridiculous. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and let's move on. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get into the final segment of the show. Let's talk about a red pill topic here, so strap in. Transgendered athletes are poised to ruin girls' sports. This is from the Federalist, and I read through this article, and there are some really significant trends that we have to think about. Right now you have, for instance, and as the BJJ community, I feel like it's something we need to start thinking about, because it's only around the corner for our sport, for our competitions, for our daughters, for our teenage girls, for our mothers, our sisters, to possibly have to grapple and watch them be taken down and slammed to the ground by a biological male who decided that he is now a female. So, here's the thing. Reading through the article, right now, there has been some law precedent that says that biological males have to be, or trans males, those that are transitioning into becoming female, need to be recognized as female from schools and things of that nature, but only for the Title VII. Title IX is the part that deals with educational opportunities and sports. Okay, so maybe collegiately right now it's not going to happen, but we already see it happening, right? We see it in some high school districts, right? There are some biologically born males that now identify as female who on track teams are blowing away female competition. Um, I can't remember the person's name, but there's a power lifter, biological male, transitioning to female that he has essentially smashed powerlifting records, female powerlifting records, in like a single day, like something like 10 or 12 records, like in a single day. He smashed their records, like absolutely smashed them, obliterated them. You have Felon Fox, transgendered MMA fighter. Hasn't won every single fight. I think she's maybe lost. He's lost one fight, maybe two. But some of the, but the way that I just have to say it, the way that he is beating on biological women is disturbing. The amount of training, the amount of skill that the female athletes have to compete with him is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's just out of hand. You have I believe it's Australian handball player that he used to play for the Australian, I believe the Australian men's team, national men's team, and now he's decided to transition, so he's playing for the female team and just smashing records. Um, we have to, as a jiu-jitsu community, understand that this is not far behind to try and filter into. There will be those soon that will try to filter this into our sport, into our events, and we have to have an answer. And it's time we start talking about it and thinking about it now, rather than waiting until, you get to a tournament and there is, a ripped, 5 o'clock shadowed, 17-year-old in your daughter's 145-pound division. And looks like a 17-year-old boy, but he identifies as a female, so he's about to smash all your 145-pound girls. It's just around the corner. So I think we need to start talking about it now and start addressing it now. Particularly, I mean, there is a part of me that understands that in non-contact sports or sports that there is controlled or very little contact, how, you can make the argument that, well, it's just a game and, whatever, it's fine. But in a combat sport, we're talking MMA, we're talking jiu-jitsu, judo, karate, taekwondo, whatever other Olympic sports you might talk about, kickboxing, boxing, wrestling, to what would be the point? What's the point of having a females division if we're just going to allow men to compete in it? What's the point? And we should have seen this coming. I mean, we should have seen that this would be coming soon down the road. But as a community, we really have to come together, because we can't have this ruin women's BJJ, right? We can't have it ruin women's BJJ. And it's about to, right? Because we already have a very small number of women that compete in jiu-jitsu. We already have a very small number of women who train jiu-jitsu. If essentially we're going to say that men can now compete in their divisions and smash them, like, what's really the point? It will slowly but surely kill the market of women's jiu-jitsu. And, you know, if you're a academy owner, right? If you're a school owner, that's got to be pretty disturbing to you. That's some of your client base that will be diminished simply because what would be the point for women? I mean, yeah, they could get self-defense and all that kind of stuff, but after they're self-defense efficient, why would they ever compete? Take some of the fun out of it. I mean, this could be huge in our sport. This could be huge in jiu-jitsu. I mean, particularly, like I said, it could be big in, all the combat sports. It can really affect the combat sports simply because we already have a very small number of women who compete and train in the combat sports. So, guys, if you don't agree with this, you need to let your voice be heard. Okay? It's time to stop being silent on everything and just think that it doesn't matter because it's not in your gym or it's not at your tournament yet, because it will be. Let your voice be heard on this. I definitely do not want my daughter competing against a biological male in her teenage or her early 20s or beyond. I mean, once that puberty kicks in, no more. I don't want my daughters competing against that. Not when you've seen injuries happen. When you've seen catastrophic injuries happen. And I think that they're much more likely when you mismatch a male and a female. Alright, guys. That's what we got for today's show. I hate to end it on a sobering note, but it was something that I really wanted to talk about and get to and bring to the attention of everybody who's in the jiu-jitsu community. It's up to us to say something. It's up to us to talk about it. We have to think about more than ourselves. It's not just about us. It's about our daughters. It's about our sisters. It's about, our mothers. So let your voice be heard when it comes to this. And let your coach know, hey, if this is going this way, please keep me in the loop, because I don't want my kids competing with that. I don't want my daughter getting smashed that way. Right? Okay, guys. Well, until next time, remember, be practical, be purposeful, get fit with a purpose, guys.
But there's Uzis in our schools. Every dude who touched a boob or a booty getting me too. What you expect from the kids who went to Hooters after school? We're all triggered and defensive. We're all racist and we're sexist. We all grew up watching South Park. How are we offended? Now being fat is beautiful. Name a thing that you can't do. Jumping jacks, run a mile, live past 42. Man, it used to be cool to just flip a bird to the system, and now it's trendy to be triggered and pretend you're a victim. It's my race, it's my weight, it's because I'm a Christian. I hate the internet and anyone who has an opinion. And everybody angry if you say white. Okay, fine. Pass me the brush and I'll paint my face to the shades right. Let's talk about abortion. Sorry, tell me how this works. Bacteria is life on Mars, but a heartbeat isn't life on Earth? Weird.